Hello, 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 my microbial motherships. Welcome back to the IBS Freedom Podcast. I am joined by Amy Hollenkamp. Cue the applause. Cue the applause.
Hello, everybody.
And today we're going to be doing another episode about SIBO. But wait, you've already covered SIBO, you might be saying to yourself. Nay, not in this way. Amy, care to lead us in with the topic for today?
Yeah, we're going to talk about really the microbes that make up SIBO and some of the misconceptions that are out there about the microbes that make up SIBO. Because there's a lot of misconceptions about what that composition is when it comes to SIBO and what microbes are actually overgrowing. Yep. You know, it's not uncommon to see, even the good bugs are overgrowing in SIBO. And if you are not watching this live, Nikki is shaking her head.
And cringing a little.
Right.
Yeah, and I want to kind of start out by pointing out just a couple things. So this is kind of the equivalent of if you had an infection, starting by saying that SIBO is not actually an infection, it's a bit different. But if you had an infection, say that you had a nice pustule on your arm, right? And it was just gross, oozing, disgusting, and you wanted to get something to take care of that. Would you just be like, oh, it's a pustule, therefore I'm going to take this antibiotic or this herb? Or might you go to the doctor and ask them to swab it and try to identify what the thing is that's giving you a pustule on your arm? I feel like a majority of us are going to go try to identify what is in the pustule. Similarly, if you get a UTI, oftentimes it's a good step to get a urine culture and just look and see okay, is it E. coli? Is it Proteus? What type of bacteria is this? Because you can target it more specifically if you know what you're tackling, right?
Well, and I do think that that's a sign of a better doctor that's going to culture. Because I have also seen the opposite happen, where it's just take an antibiotic for that, and especially with vaginal stuff too. I've seen sometimes be it looks like yeast when it might be bacterial.
Yeah, it's a valid point. And I think that I've seen that a lot with UTIs also. It sounds like a UTI, it feels like a UTI, here, take some Bactrim. And then I've had patients where they're like, yeah, I thought I had a UTI and I did the urine sample, and then right away they gave me the antibiotics, because UTIs are freaking miserable. So right. I get it, I do. But then the doctor calls a day later and they say, oh, JK LOL, it's actually not, there's no bacteria, so it's not a UTI, but go ahead and take the rest of the antibiotics anyway. It's well, why? Yeah. What's the point if it's not infectious? But anyway, so this is kind of what we're trying to get at with these aspirate studies when they do this, is that instead of just saying you have bacterial overgrowth in the small bowel, they've actually done studies where they go in and they suck out the juice, they suck out the bacteria, called an aspirate, and then they culture it. But there's a couple of limitations to these studies that I do want to talk about before we treat this body of research as though it's gospel, which of course we wouldn't do that anyway. But
right.
The first one I want to bring up is that what you identify is going to be a bit limited, because the small bowel is really long. Mm-hmm. And even if they do an aspirate, you're not going to be able to sample all of the microbiome from all of the, 30 feet or whatever it is that's coiled up in your gut right now. So they might take a sample from the duodenum, a sample from the jejunum, a sample from the ileum, but they're going to be leaving out feet and feet and feet and feet and feet and feet of microbiome that is going to be uncharted territory. But it's really impractical to say let's do a study where we take an aspirate every 6 inches throughout the tube. Nobody's going to volunteer for that. Nobody's going to pay for that. It isn't going to work. But that's the downside with doing aspirate studies to diagnose SIBO. Even if you're not looking at the type of bacteria, the downside is that you're only going to be able to diagnose it if you sample from the correct location. If somebody has SIBO and it's in their duodenum and you sample from the ileum, you're going to give that person an incorrect negative SIBO diagnosis and say, no, you don't have SIBO, when in fact they actually do. So that's probably the single biggest limitation I can think of. I can think of one other, but I'm going to turn off my space heater for a quick second. So, Amy, do you have any others that you want to share?
I think sometimes too the method that they're using for culturing, or like if it's a culture-based method versus 16S or some of these other methods, you could get different results because, especially with culture, I know Lucy Mailing talks a little bit about this with some of Pimentel's research. I think he did both in some of his studies where he did culture half the time, and then I'd have to relook it up, but I'm pretty sure he did two different methods.
You know what's weird though? The studies that I've seen where they use 16S, it feels really ass backwards, but they do the aspirate and then they culture what they get, and then they take the sample from what was cultured, and then they do 16S.
Yeah.
Which doesn't make a lot of sense, because one of the things, to know about microbiology is that different bacteria and different organisms need different environmental factors and fuel to survive.
Right.
So you need to plate them on a different kind of substrate. Maybe some of them die when they get exposed to oxygen and you need to limit their oxygen exposure. Some of them might need oxygen. So that, I think, is also a big limitation of this type of study.
Yeah, I almost think of it as every microbe has their favorite food, and if you put them on an agar dish that has the favorite food of one microorganism, you're not going to get the same result as what you cultured it from.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that could be a limitation with some of this stuff too. It's, again, anytime you're extracting from an environment that's going to be lower oxygen, it could change again anytime you pull it out. But I think especially if you're culturing it in an agar dish. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would love to see a study, and I don't think I've seen any yet. I could be wrong, or I could be a little outdated. But I would love to see a study where they do the aspirate and they suck out the juice, and then they immediately send that off for 16S testing or PCR testing or something. Then that would be great, and you're going to capture an accurate number, and you're going to see what was there versus, again, when you're growing something on a petri dish. Let's say, let's think about bacteria that would die upon contact with oxygen. So I'm trying to think. I'm not a huge microbiology buff in the strictest sense, in the laboratory sense. But I feel like Akkermansia is not oxygen tolerant, if I remember correctly. But if you take a bacteria that dies on contact with oxygen, and then you plate it and you culture it, you're going to see very, very little of that one show up, because what you did manage to sample has died once it came in contact with the plate. But something that does really well in oxygen, say E. coli, is going to have a competitive advantage, and it's going to be able to replicate and spread and grow itself very, very easily, because now you're killing off all of the bacteria that are not oxygen tolerant, and you're opening up the space for the oxygen tolerant bacteria to thrive. Right. And then you go and do your assessment, and you're like, wow, there's quadruple the amount of E. coli on this plate compared to this other bacteria. And it's because the E. coli was able to grow and the other one wasn't. So
well, it's an interesting side point too. I know this is a big reason why the place where I did my FMT doesn't like people doing at-home FMTs. Because they have, and I don't remember how they do it, but they have a certain part of their process and collection to try to preserve some of most of the microbes, again, that don't thrive in an oxygenated environment. And so that was the scientist at the Tameout Clinic, the head guy. I think his name's Glenn Taylor. I heard him talk once, and he was like, that's my biggest reason to not do at-home FMTs, because,
Side
again,
note,
go ahead.
should we get somebody from the Taymont Clinic to do an episode with us? How fun would that be to nerd out? You could reach out. You're an alumni. You could reach out and be like, hey, I'm a successful alumnus and I have a smoking hot podcast. Come on over. That would be super fun.
I'll make a note of that.
That is a super valid point because, the moment that your donor poops out the poop, right, you're going to start killing some of the microbes, at least on the outer surface of the stool. And then, with Home FMT, I think a lot of the time they put it in a blender and they blend it up and then they administer it. And again, you're going to be aerating it and mixing in oxygen throughout the entire sample in that process. So that's a really valid point.
Well, and I will add too, I think it was majority of microbes don't really love oxygen. If I remember right, and don't quote me on this, but I think it was he was saying, 90% don't love oxygen. So
yeah. Well, it makes sense because there's not a lot of oxygen in your intestines, right?
Right. So again, it's fascinating that's
that's a really valid point. I mean, presumably, at least if you did the FMT and it was fresher, right? At least the ratios of the bacteria wouldn't get a chance to shift all that much if you went from catching the poop, immediately blending it, immediately inserting it. But that's a really valid point. Microbiology is weird. That's all I have to say. It's just weird, and the bacteria are smarter than us. I swear to God, they're going to take over the world. We don't stand a chance. But that being said, going first with our knowledge of the limitations of this type of study, again, the location of where they're sampling and the type of identification methods that they're going to use. That being said, we still do have some studies that have done the aspirate and culture results, and they've looked at this. And pretty across the board, the two that pop up in literally every study I think that I've ever come across are E. coli and Klebsiella. Mm. Those are the two that keep coming up repeatedly over and over and over again. There's some other proteobacteria like Pseudomonas pops up. I think Citrobacter might have popped up in one study if I remember correctly. So there are others in the proteobacteria phylum, but it seems like E. coli and Klebsiella make up the majority. And again, that's largely from Dr. Pimentel's research that I've seen that, right, but I've seen it in other studies as well.
Yeah, again, the proteobacteria seem to be the problem children when it comes to SIBO. And I would say, too, the other thing that's fascinating about that research as well is it seems, which it makes sense, if you have sort of a higher level of proteobacteria compared to a control group that doesn't have SIBO, they've also found lower diversity, which makes sense. Again, if you have a not very diverse small intestinal microbiome, there's going to be more room for something like a Klebsiella and an E. coli to take over.
Absolutely.
So again, I think it's this problem where you have some of these sketchier bugs overgrowing in an environment that has low diversity. It's a recipe for problems and for SIBO.
Yeah. And we still, we talked about the one study a while back, I think it was a 2012 study, right? That they were able to show that the people who had bacterial overgrowth in the small bowel were not universally symptomatic. There were people who had an overgrowth, an increased quantity, but they were completely asymptomatic. And the severity of the overgrowth did not track with the severity of the symptoms. But the people who had lower diversity in the small bowel did have symptoms, and the people with good diversity did not have symptoms, and the severity of the diversity problem tracked with the severity of the symptoms, if I remember correctly. So we've seen some hints of this for a while.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, well, and I think that was actually more recent, if I'm thinking of the same study. Okay. Was it a Sonnenberg-based study?
I don't
The
remember.
Sonnenbergs? I think I'm thinking of the same one. I think it was more 2017. It was a little, or 2018, maybe. Somewhere in the last 4 or 5 years.
Okay. I'll go with it because I don't have I don't have one of those brains that could just be author such and such from the University of Pennsylvania wrote an article on January 1st, 2019. I've met people like that, and it just boggles my mind how they can memorize that level of stuff. So yeah,
Right.
I could be incorrect, but point being is that we have at least the one study that has tracked, what seems to cause the symptoms, and it's not the degree of the overgrowth, it's the degree of loss of diversity, which again, that would open up a pocket for something like E. coli or Klebsiella to take hold. So it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and I think in if we're thinking of the same study, which I think we are, don't you love how much we prepare? We prepare so much for these.
We try to keep this conversational and on the fly for the most part.
Right. But again, it calls into question more of the composition of the microbes versus, again, the overabundance of the microbes.
Yeah.
So, again, what they found in that study is that some of the people that had more bacteria, so an overabundance of bacteria in their small bowel, actually were eating more fibers. So again, they were linking it more to, I don't know if they linked it to like vegetarian diets. I remember that vaguely, so I'm not sure if that's accurate or not, but I know it was like sometimes higher fiber diets they were sort of linking to maybe having more bacteria, but the composition was better. Or again, the composition was not always off when there was too much bacteria. So I found that interesting that, again, they were linking kind of more abundance of bacteria to just a higher fiber, fermentable fiber diet that could be leading to a little bit more microbes growing, but it doesn't necessarily link to symptoms.
Yeah. And that's what actually matters at the end of the day.
Right.
Like, nobody on this podcast right now gives a crap, pun intended, about the actual number of microbes in their small bowel. What they care about is, do I feel like crap or do I feel good?
Right.
End of story.
Right. And again, like, it sometimes calls into question at times, like, I don't know if you've worked with some individuals like this where maybe they go in for like a functional appointment about something totally, like their gut's fine, like they have no gut symptoms, but then they run the whole gamut of testing and their provider's like, well, see, look, you got SIBO. And this is assuming that they're interpreting the test right, because again, I've definitely seen my fair share of people who have been told their test is more positive. And again, I don't think you can just rely on the test to really determine that either, but assuming that the test is interpreted properly and that it's showing kind of a higher degree of hydrogen gas or methane gas, again, it's crazy to me because sometimes I'll see those people who had no gut symptoms and then they get diagnosed with SIBO and then they go on all these rounds of antimicrobials or whatever, and then their gut gets so messed up. And then they're coming to us at that point. They're like, I just have some crazy SIBO case. I don't know what happened. But a lot of times it's frustrating to me that, you have these people at home don't have any symptoms and they go on these insane kind of SIBO protocols for clearing. And it basically creates a problem that wasn't there to begin with. Or again, like to the degree at which it was addressed. So again, I find that really frustrating, but I think sometimes when you have those people that might have a little bit more bacteria, might flag on a SIBO breath test but have no symptoms, it makes me wonder a little bit about those people, in the testing. Because again, I wouldn't probably do aggressive treatment if someone wasn't having symptoms. It depends on if, again, maybe there were systemic symptoms or something that you could do a little bit of experimentation with, but I'd be a little bit more reluctant to do more aggressive type stuff if someone's not really having any gut related symptoms. Yeah.
Well, and that's one issue that we've talked about a lot in these episodes, is that there is a fairly strong unspoken belief, maybe spoken also, belief that if it is natural, it is without consequence. You can do it and be totally A-okay. And it's like, I've got news for you. If you take enough oregano oil or if you take enough berberine, you are going to kill some of the good microbes.
Right.
We like to criticize Western medicine for overusing antibiotics all day, every day. And yet there are providers and there are people who are telling us to just take oregano and just take grapeseed oil or grapeseed extract. It's like, well, it's a natural antibiotic, but that doesn't mean it's without harm or without consequence. And yeah, like I've been working with somebody in that exact situation. She was getting treatment for psoriasis, and a functional provider, I forget if it was a SIBO diagnosis or not now, but they had her do like a really, really, really restrictive elimination diet where she was basically down to eating like 20 foods, and then she added them in one at a time. And she did some other stuff, I forget now, but she then developed diarrhea, chronic diarrhea.
Right.
And we've gotten her to a point now where she no longer has the diarrhea and her gut is much happier, but that's largely come from adding more fibers and adding more prebiotics and probiotics into her diet, not from just killing and starving. I know I'm a broken record and we talk about this every episode pretty much.
Right. But I think it's super relevant in this conversation because the composition matters so much.
Yeah.
And whenever you clear and you're kind of clearing things out, sometimes herbals, and we're not against herbals or things that clear out the gut, they can be sometimes really helpful just to kind of wipe the slate clean and allow for the composition to reform in a more beneficial manner. But again, at the same time, there's this narrow window of success when it comes to clearing. Maybe if you do too little, you might not get all the benefits that you want. And not everyone needs aggressive clearing either. But then again, if you go a little bit too far the other way, it can really mess up the composition, change the diversity in the small bowel, and create some additional problems that you might not have had to begin with. So it's this fine line that you toe, and I feel that the problem is that the SIBO world is so abusive to the herbals and the antibiotic space. It's just like keep taking them, and there's no consideration of the composition and the diversity of the small bowel, and it can get people into trouble over time. And again, that's why in practice, herbals don't work forever. Like eventually you hit a wall where they're not helpful. Same thing with rifaximin in particular too. That one always seems to have a limiting rate of return where like maybe it worked the first couple times you did it, but by the third time, I don't think it really helped. Fourth time definitely didn't help. So again, I feel as though, we might be a broken record, but it's important with this conversation to understand that it's still a delicate balance in the small intestines. And so you want to use tools wisely. And at some point, you have to dedicate some time and energy to rebuilding the composition. Yes. You can't just keep clearing. So it's again, how do you balance maybe some clearing, maybe some modulating of the gut, but then also flip the switch to rebuilding. And that's can be a hard mental switch because the SIBO space is kind of way more prone to the clearing and modulating side of the equation versus the rebuilding and repairing of the composition.
Well, and I think that the SIBO world becomes an echo chamber very quickly.
Right.
Like either, going to your doctor's office and they're telling you the same kind of narrative every single time you go in, like that becomes an echo chamber. But also, it's the idea that you have to kill and clear, kill and starve and clear. That becomes reinforced anytime you do feel better with an antimicrobial or an antibiotic, right? Like you have a hypothesis, you take the Xifaxan, you do feel better the first time, and you're like, whoa, killing the SIBO really helped. And it reinforces that both consciously and unconsciously in your nervous system. And then, heaven forbid, if you go on Instagram or Facebook groups or Reddit and you get on all of these threads and forums of people talking about SIBO, and it is 99.9% people talking about starving and clearing and killing.
Right.
And you become brainwashed to a degree. Like, you become convinced that that's the only way and that's the best way. And it's not necessarily true. It's not to say that killing and clearing and starving can't help for a short period of time, but it's not going to fix the reason you have low diversity and the overgrowth of E. coli or whatever it might be. It's not going to fix the reason why your motility sucks. It's not going to fix the fried, crispy vagus nerve because you've been stressed 10 out of 10 for too long. So, it's a slippery slope getting into that world, because it very quickly becomes an echo chamber and it reinforces that belief, and it's hard to pull yourself out.
That's such a great point. And I feel as though the same thing happens with the diet too. With the diet, again, you remove all these foods and you feel better for a period of time. And so then the belief is, oh, I still have some bloating. I just need to find the next food that's irritating. And then it sort of spirals. But again, it's that feedback you're getting from the nervous system that reinforces the belief. Yeah. And again, I think that there's different scenarios in the SIBO space, like with foods, like with the clearance, where that can be a problem over time, just because it can keep you stuck.
Yeah. And it makes sense, right? Like, it's not even that it's not like faulty neurology or faulty, psychology going on. It's like, from the survival kind of perspective, when we were hunters and gatherers and we were out, just trying to find our next meal, we had to have these reinforcing loops in the nervous system to protect us. Like, if you go down to this one spot near the river and there's a saber-toothed tiger and it chases you and almost kills you, you need part of your nervous system to tell you, don't go back there, because that tiger is probably waiting for you. Right. And similarly, if you're hunting and gathering and you stumble upon this, fruit tree that has, maybe fruit's a bad example, but you stumble upon some food source and you eat it, and then you feel amazing and you fill up your belly and you're satiated and you feel like nourished and happy and healthy, you need part of your nervous system to be like, I've got to look for more of those trees. That was amazing. So it makes sense that we have these reinforcing loops in our nervous system where, like, if something works, quote unquote, if something makes us feel good, we have neurology in place that makes us seek that out again. And if something makes us feel, sorry, did I start with worse or better? I just confused my brain.
I think you said
Speaking
bad.
of neurology.
I think you said bad.
I switched it then. Thank you. If something makes you feel bad, then you have something in place that makes you avoid that thing. And if something makes you feel good, you have something neurologically speaking that tells you to seek that thing again. So this is no different. Like, and I was on that path. Like, I shared, way back in episode 1. Right. Remember when we were podcasting babies and we did episode 1 and we told our story? I want to go back and watch a young Amy and Nikki. Anyway. But going back, so that's the path I was on. I was like, cutting out gluten, dairy, sesame, that helped X amount. And now it just must be that there's one more food. What if it's blueberries? What if it's, almonds? There must just be one more food. And if I could find that holy grail food, then I will feel better. And that's not what happened. Spoiler alert. But again, it makes sense that I had gotten some reward from using that strategy for some time. And my brain was seeking that out again, assuming that was going to be true another time. So it makes sense, but be careful of what you perceive to be working and what you perceive to not be working, or what you perceive to be making you feel bad. And that segues into another point I wanted to make here with this topic, which is, raise your hand if you've heard a SIBO patient say, probiotics made my SIBO worse. Right? You can't see, but we're raising our hands. Just believe me. So, thank you, Amy. Amy actually wasn't, and then I just peer pressured her into doing it.
Well, there was a little delay in the video, so I didn't see you. It really rapidly caught up, so I didn't see you doing that, and then all of a sudden I did, so I was delayed.
That's okay. Awkward turtle.
Right.
But anyway, people, and again, this is understandable too. When something makes you feel worse, we perceive that as aggravating the problem or like being a bad thing for us. And again, some of that makes sense. If you lick lead paint every day for a week and then you have a pounding headache, you want your brain to put two and two together and figure out, hey, maybe licking lead paint is a really bad idea. I won't do that again. But with anything like health related or medical related, especially with this world, there's so much trial and error and experimentation, and you have to be really curious. Right. And I do find that the things that do not work and the things that make you feel worse actually are going to tell you more about your body than the things that work a lot of the time. Because you could start picking it apart, like, okay, why did the berberine make me feel bad? Was it because of the antimicrobial action? And, I killed something off that didn't need to be killed off, or I compromised my diversity or whatever. Or is it because berberine also has blood sugar lowering ability, and maybe the berberine made you a little bit hypoglycemic and you didn't realize it? Or maybe it's because berberine has immunomodulatory action and it's tinkering with the balance of your immune system and it's frigging up your immune seesaw a bit. Or maybe there's something else that berberine does that we don't even know yet. But you can look at something as like, okay, this made me feel bad. Now let's try to understand why. And that can be helpful. But the classic example is, again, like the SIBO patient who says probiotics made me feel worse. And the assumption from the internet and from their own experience and from, the forums and whatever, the assumption is, oh, I added bacteria on top of bacteria and that made the bacterial overgrowth worse. Therefore, nobody with SIBO should ever take probiotics. And that is the furthest from the truth ever. Right. That is so the opposite of what you want to do. There's been repeated studies over and over again using different types of probiotics saying that probiotics help with the eradication of SIBO and they help with symptoms repeatedly. And in IBS, which we know a lot of those people have SIBO. The research stands very much in favor of probiotics. But again, it's like, if you're curious, well, why did the probiotics make you feel bad? Maybe it just wasn't the right probiotic for you. Right? There's a million different kinds and they're really hit and miss. Maybe it's nothing against probiotics. Maybe you just happened to try one that your body didn't really like. But the next one you tried, maybe you would love it. You don't know until you try, but I don't think it's wise to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say that all probiotics are bad for SIBO when, again, the overwhelming majority of the research suggests otherwise.
Right. And a couple points. So I think to circle back a little bit to when you were talking about, again, just how your own biases and sort of beliefs can affect your ability to kind of try different things that could be really helpful. I just wanted to point out that that's why I think it's really helpful to have a practitioner or someone that knows what they're doing, because sometimes it's a very passive process, for me, where someone's like, should I try to add in this food? And again, 99% of the time I'm gonna say yes, let's try to add it in. How do you feel comfortable doing it? What does that look like for you? And whatever. So it's kind of about guiding the process a bit, but helping you build up confidence in different ideas and solutions, I think can be really important. And again, if you have a provider that's kind of sort of exacerbating some of the beliefs that are keeping you stuck, that's something to just kind of consider, because I know a lot of the clients I've talked to, it's like, oh, I went to a provider that has me so freaked out of probiotics, like what you're saying, or had me so freaked out by switching up my diet that I had to be strict low FODMAP forever. So sometimes the providers are instilling beliefs that aren't productive either. And again, especially in the probiotic case, there's still a lot of providers that do not like probiotics at all. I have a client right now who had a gastrectomy, and so he sort of felt like he's had SIBO forever. Like he's like, oh, it's just like something because of my anatomy. Like I've had it. He was even on antibiotics cyclically like 30 years ago. Like they kind of knew that he had some of these issues kind of before SIBO was a big thing, that he was getting some overgrowth of bacteria because he noticed, every time I would go on antibiotics. But he found probiotics to be super, super helpful. And so that stopped him from taking antibiotics. Yeah.
Which is a huge win.
Right. And then more recently, again, he went to a new GI doc who has him taking cyclical antibiotics every month for 6 or 8 months. And he's not feeling like he's almost feeling worse. And he has kind of some weight stability issues with some of the gastrectomy stuff. And so he does some tube feeds and things like that to try to maintain weight. But it's like, I keep circling back, like the probiotics seem to help. Like for years, you relied on probiotics to maintain your symptoms. And it's like, it seems like ever since the doctors have been super aggressive with you about clearing, like things have been getting worse. Yeah. But again, he's still a little bit apprehensive. I think he's sort of in a better place now because he's like, oh, this is not working. It's kind of run its course, but it's so interesting to me. Like even if something has worked in the past, you could still sort of be pushed towards a mentality of, oh, maybe it's not the best thing. But yeah, I think that probiotics, what you're saying, the data in SIBO, I think is clear. I think that there's still probably work to be done in the probiotic space in general.
Oh yeah.
Because, and again, maybe we can't even always determine based on the research what the best strains are for you, because it's such a complex environment of different factors.
Would you say it's a crapshoot?
It's a crapshoot. It's a crapshoot. But yeah, I mean, I think it's coming around a bit, but yeah, I think there's just a lot of intensity against probiotics. And again, I think on the very tippy top surface level, if you're thinking SIBO is an overgrowth, an overabundance, I should say, of bacteria, maybe on the surface, you don't want to add more to that, makes sense. But if you know the complexity of the environment, and that, again, the composition matters and what bacteria are at play, like the proteobacteria, the strains that are in the probiotics are not the strains that are going to cause problems from a SIBO standpoint. Doesn't mean that you can't maybe have a negative reaction to one or multiple probiotic strains, but it just means that they're not going to add to this overgrowth or overabundance of bacteria.
Yeah, that is false. And I have a video that I did a while back, maybe a year ago, on my YouTube channel, and I think it's literally just titled Probiotic Side Effects, if I remember correctly. If you type into YouTube Triangle Holistic Gut Health, which is my channel name, and then probiotic side effects, I'm pretty sure it'll pop up. But, I talked about this, and one of the things that I pointed out is that probiotics tinker with our immune system and like the balance of our immune system. And I hypothesize that what's happening a lot of the time when people take a probiotic and they feel worse, you're probably stimulating or altering your immune function, and then that translates to being a bit more like acutely inflamed or feeling gross. Or maybe there's like a die-off reaction, like maybe you're actually starting to kill off some of that E. coli and it's a good thing. You know what's weird, actually? Can we just pause on this? If somebody took a buttload of oregano and then they felt horrible the next day, universally, 100% of the time, people would be like, yes, I'm doing it. It's a die-off reaction. That means I'm killing the SIBO real good. Woohoo. Like, I've actually had students and patients tell me that they hope they get a die-off reaction. And I'm like, no, you really don't want a die-off reaction.
Right,
right. And it's not super, super common to get that anyways, but like the absence of a die-off reaction does not mean you're doing anything wrong. Like, only like 10 or 20% of people are ever going to get a die-off reaction from working on the gut anyway. But literally, like, they would be jumping for joy. Well, if they had energy. But you get what I mean. Like, they would be thrilled if they got a negative reaction from oregano or berberine.
Right,
but the moment somebody feels bad when they take probiotics, they're like, oh, invent the SIBO. This is evil. This is bad. Nobody with SIBO should ever take probiotics. End of story. And it's like, what? Like, hypocritical? Like,
right.
Yeah, just it goes to show you again how deeply, deeply ingrained that narrative is of it's a bacterial overgrowth, it's an infection, you have too many bad guys, we need to murder it. Like, that's the only way that dichotomy makes any sense. But I want to spill some tea. Are you here with me for the tea spillage, my darling Amy? Are you here?
What kind of tea are we spilling? Not some good high quality tea. Let's
get into a little bit of tea. So I'm going to bring everybody's attention, and I hate clicking on this because I'm going to give the person better search engine optimization for this damn article, but whatever, it is what it is. I would like to draw everybody's attention to an article published on February 3rd, 2018, titled Why Soil-Based Probiotics Are Best for SIBO. And this is on Amy Meyer's website. I'm pretty sure I talked about this on the podcast at some point before, but why don't we do that again? So first of all, I'm just going to immediately point out that, not surprisingly, in this article, she's very keen to sell you her brand of soil-based probiotics.
Right.
It was kind of like, remember the spicy episode we did on prokinetics? And I was so mad at Ruskio because he spent like 5 days back to back on Instagram talking about how prokinetics are not needed for SIBO and they won't help you with SIBO. But then come over here to my shiny elemental diet formula that you can purchase for the low cost of the firstborn child that you have. Be aware when people are trying to sell you something, that might be a motivation. But so here's, let me just scroll down to the part that I have the biggest issue with. Okay. Probiotics, adding fuel to the fire.
Oh, God.
Okay, so she's going through, and I'm just going to jump to, I think this is, okay. Many probiotics can actually make the problem worse. Here's why. Your small intestine is not meant to have much bacteria in it. It interferes with digestion and nutrient absorption. That's debatable, but whatever. Some bacteria are necessary for these functions. You want the bacteria to be just right for optimal digestion and absorption. When bacteria are present in the small intestine, R is in italics, like indicating that like it's abnormal to have bacteria in there, which is false. But when bacteria are present in the small intestine, they are often of the Lactobacillus or Bifidobacterium species. First of all, those are genuses, not species, but now I'm just being a jerk. The majority of probiotic supplements contain Lactobacillus or Bifidobacterium, so using this type of probiotic increases the bacteria in your small intestine and adds fuel to the fire. For this reason, I believe soil-based probiotics for SIBO are the best probiotics for SIBO.
Oh, no.
Oh, my God. I'm going to lose my mind. Like, every time I reread that little paragraph, I lose my damn mind because not true at all. The fact that she said that she suggests strongly that your small intestine should have very little bacteria or no bacteria in it, that is ludicrous and false.
Right.
The fact that she explicitly says that they are often Lactobacillus or Bifidobacterium, and there's literally zero research indicating that. Zero. May I reiterate, zero. The one and only exception might be that one lactic acidosis study, but we're going to get to that in another episode someday because that's a juicy one to unfold. But dear God, false, and false. Like all of it is just falsehoods that she's using to sell you her probiotic and make a boatload of money off the probiotic. And you know what cracks me up too? I'm just going to throw this out there. at the top of the article, right under the section that says print this page, there's a little emblem that says science-based.
Oh, gosh.
And there's a little check mark next to it.
Well,
No, there's no accrediting agency that goes around checking websites and gives you the happy little check mark for being science-based.
Right.
Literally, like, her marketing agent made that little graphic and inserted it into the article. I could write an article about how the moon has an ocean on it and all of aliens have SIBO, and then I could put a little stupid thing on my article that says science-based, and you would have no way of anyway, I'm not even making sense anymore. Just you talk, Amy.
Well, yeah, I think, I don't know. It always drives me nuts too. And I don't know if her products are like this too, but a lot of practitioners that like sell their products, it's not even like their own formulations. Like it's just private label type stuff, which again is aggravating. Again, I don't know if that's the case for her, but
that it is. I know, for example, one of the products, I forget the name of her version of it, but basically it's GI Microbe X from Designs for Health. If you compare the label, it's literally an identical label, but the front part of the label has her name on one. That's all. She's just repackaging somebody else's stuff and selling it at a premium.
Right. Again, I just, that's wild to me. I don't necessarily know the ethics of that, but I think you always have to be a little skeptical of that kind of stuff that's going on. But I think the problem is you have people like her who have a really big platform that are talking about this stuff. And it's not to say that, that if you tried the probiotic that's hers, it wouldn't be helpful in your particular case. It's not to say that, but to literally say that all other probiotics are trash, essentially. But her soil-based probiotic is ridiculous. But yeah, I mean, I think that it's a shame because it perpetuates this idea and it probably keeps people from trying things that could be really helpful for them. And that's the real problem. I mean, there's always going to be a degree of experimentation when you have something like SIBO or dysbiosis or that kind of thing. In general, I think probiotics can be helpful. Some people might get, a little bit of relief from a probiotic, but a ton of relief from a prebiotic. But it took trying the two to really figure that out. Or someone might get tons of relief from the probiotic and a ton of relief from motility activator, but they didn't love kind of a prebiotic supplement. They felt better with food-based prebiotics. So again, there's all these different scenarios that, because we've worked with so many people that have had SIBO and probably cases of SIBO where they're well into their SIBO journey, it takes some degree of experimentation and breaking up these myths and these ideas that aren't true so that it opens the person's mindset up to be able to experiment and to look at things and determine, is this actually helping me? Is this pushing the needle for me versus just automatically having biased beliefs or limiting beliefs that keep them stuck. I think there has to be an ability to open your mind to different possibilities and actually try different things to determine what's going to work and what's not. And that gets tricky when there's all these beliefs rolling around, bifido and lactobacillus probiotics can't be really helpful when they certainly can. Or again, that there shouldn't be. I've heard from people in the past, oh, your small intestine should be sterile. No. And again, I probably, early on in my gut journey heard that and believed it too. So again, I'm certainly not immune to potentially falling into some of these belief systems too when I was going through my gut journey, and there's so much information and you're trying to synthesize it. But yeah, I just think based on what I've seen with clients too, probiotics can be really helpful even outside of the literature. That kind of anecdotally their probiotics can be really helpful. So yeah, it's strange. I think it's strange, sort of the weird myths and beliefs that swirl around in the SIBO space.
Yeah, and honestly, like, this touches on something that I have this idea in my head, but I don't know how to execute it. So if anybody has ideas, I'm all ears. Message me on Instagram at Triangle Guts and tell me your ideas because I would love to hear it. But what I do with my students and my patients is I send them, and I've talked about this before, I call it probiotic speed dating. And I send people home with like 2 capsules of like 19 or 20 different probiotics. And I tell them, have at it, have fun. And I literally just have them keep a diary, and they try, probiotic A for Monday and Tuesday. They try out probiotic B on Thursday and Friday, and they just go through and they keep a diary of how they're feeling. And it's fantastic because what ends up happening, and this is where it gets a little bit tricky because I'm trying to figure out how to make this more widely available or widely applicable to everybody. Right. But when I do that, most of the time, what happens is that people will say that the vast majority of the probiotics didn't seem to do anything, right? But I'm only giving them 2 days. So it's kind of unfair to the probiotics. But this is just a real quick and dirty that we're doing. So in the 2-day trial process, most probiotics seem like they do absolutely nothing, which is not surprising. Maybe 1 or 2 of them out of 20 will make you feel notably worse. And again, like, this is my patient population and student population, like people with IBS and SIBO and dysbiosis. Like maybe 1 or 2 or 3 will make the person feel notably worse. Like they'll have worse bloating, worse diarrhea, really stinky poops, I don't know, whatever it is. A couple of them will make them feel worse. But then there's almost always like 2 or 3 or 4 that people say makes them feel noticeably better, which is really surprising because, again, this is only a 2-day thing, but they will notice, oh man, when I took probiotic number 6, like I had no bloating, or I had the most amazing poops of my entire life, or, I was able to eat a little bit of onion for the first time in forever, like whatever it might be. But if you think about the numbers that I just threw out there, so out of 20, let's say about 10% of the probiotics make people feel noticeably worse. 10 or maybe 20% of the probiotics make people feel noticeably better. And then the vast majority of them seem to do diddly squat. So what is the person to do when they go to Whole Foods Market or they go on Amazon or they go to wherever and they try to buy a probiotic off the shelf? Like, I don't think it's practical to say that everybody just needs to try 20 different probiotics, right? Like that's going to be really expensive and really cumbersome and not very appealing. So what I would love to do is like have a side business where I just like package up these products in little Ziploc baggies and mail them all over the world so people can try out different probiotics. Like I would love for that to be a business, but I think that I would start running into like, all of the companies will have stuff on their labels that are like, these are not for resale purposes or whatever it is. Like, I don't know the legality and like how that would work logistically. Like me ripping open a bottle, divvying it up into little doggy bags, tester bags, and then mailing them out while also charging for that service because I'm a nice person, but I'm not going to send you this stuff for free. Like, it's just like, I'm not going to lose money on this endeavor and just send these all over the world for shits and giggles. But like, I wonder how I could model this and make it something that's applicable and like obtainable for more people to do, because that's been my experience with it. Like most probiotics in the span of 2 days don't seem to move the needle much. A couple of them might make you feel worse, but a few of them make you feel better. And it's literally the most unscientific and scientific thing ever, because when somebody says, wow, probiotic number 3 made me feel good, I'm like, cool, let's do it for longer.
Right.
Right? Like, it's super basic. I feel like an elementary student could come up with this design for this experiment. But that's all you need to do. You need to listen to your body and then follow those cues and be curious and be experimental and try the things that make you feel better. So, I don't know, like, if anybody has ideas how I could bring this vision to the world, you let me know. But I'm really stuck trying to think of how I could mail these little probiotic tester baggies all over the world.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to brainstorm on that. Maybe I'll hold my belly for good luck.
There you go. I think the only way around it that I can think of, if I made the probiotics myself, right?
Yeah.
Like if I formulated and sold and marketed 20 different probiotics, then I think like it wouldn't be as hairy. I could just have like, tester bags, and you could order like 2 pills of each from my website.
Right.
But again, that gets into like, I don't want to have a probiotic business. Like I don't want to have, at least at this point in my life, like I don't want to make probiotics and like have a whole separate side business. So yeah, that's not super appealing, but that's the only thing I can think of as a workaround for this. But in the meantime, I'm going to keep doing it with my students and my patients, but I'm all ears if y'all have ideas, because I've been thinking about this for a few years and I haven't come up with a solution yet.
It's a tricky one. Tricky one.
Yep. All right. Well, I think that's largely my 2 cents on this topic. I'll leave people with a couple of little morsels at the end here, if I may. But do you have anything top of mind at the moment, or are you thinking we're winding down also? As she yawns at me. I'm sorry I bored you.
I'm thinking we're winding down. Sorry, I have like I was telling Nikki before this, I have a little bit of like some allergies going on, so I have a little bit of like a sore throat scenario and a little fatigue.
It's the baby messing with your immune system. Just laughing at you. Like,
there's such a leech in there. The baby's a little leech.
I mean, I would call it a parasite, but yeah, leech, parasite, tomato, for sure. Yep. Well, the couple of things I was going to throw out there, again, for those of you who are maybe a tad bit nerdier and you want to do some fact checking or some reading on this topic, I have a little handy chart in some of my notes that I had made a while back. So the bacteria that show up most on these aspirate studies that I've seen, at least, E. coli and Klebsiella are definitely number 1 on the list. They come up in pretty much all the studies that I've seen. Aeromonas and Enterococcus also show up a fair amount, it seems like. Pseudomonas, Staphylococcus, Streptococcus, Citrobacter, and Proteus have popped up a few times here or there. Notice I'm not saying Lactobacillus or Bifidobacterium. I'm just going to reiterate that one more time. But there's a couple of PubMed IDs that I will throw out there. So again, if you are exceptionally nerdy and you're like, man, I'm jonesing to read this on PubMed, you could be my guest. So the first one, get your pen and paper. There you go. Get your pen and paper ready, folks. So the first one, it's a 2020 study. I believe this is from Pimentel's group, and the PubMed ID is 326-45011. Then there was a 2015 article. The PubMed ID number is 25865706. Then a 2014 paper with the PubMed ID 248496768. And last but not least, a 2012 paper with the PubMed ID 222-62197. So have at it. Go ahead and read up on this topic if you want to nerd out. If not, then just ignore what I just said. I have one thing that I could close on, with your blessing, of course. So I love stand-up comedy. And when I just said the PubMed ID for that last one, and it started with 222, it made me think of one of my favorite stand-up comedians. Have you ever heard Mitch Hedberg at all?
Nope, I have not.
Oh my God. All right, homework for you. So Mitch Hedberg was a comedian who passed away in 2004. I think it was a heroin overdose. Like, you could tell just like in all of the things he ever recorded, he sounded like a combination of drunk and high and like on all the drugs. So I'm not surprised by hearing how he passed, but he was so funny. They called him the king of the one-liners. And he, like, his style of comedy, there was no cohesiveness to the comedy bit.
Right.
Like, it would just be like one little quip or like one line or 2 lines or like a 30-second bit. And then he would roll into something completely unrelated. And then he would roll into something else completely unrelated. And it was just really like all over the place. But they were so observant and it was such a smart style of comedy where like he would point out things and you'd be like, yeah. So one of his more famous bits is that he says, and I'm going to try to imitate the voice a little bit if I can. He said, I like stairs because stairs can never, or no. Oh, I just botched it. Whoever has heard Mitch Hedberg, you're going to laugh at that. He said, I love escalators because escalators can never break. They can only become stairs. And it's like, you hear that and you're like, he's right.
Right.
Darn it. But the one that made me think of Mitch Hedberg and why I'm now giving you all the homework to watch Mitch Hedberg on YouTube or wherever you can find him. He had a bit, because again, like 2004. So this was the time of the landline phones still. Like, I think I got my very first crappy cell phone in like 2003 or 2004, but it was one of those like for emergencies only kind of cell phones. So this was when landlines were a thing, and like when you moved to a different house, you would get a new telephone number a lot of the time. And he said, the next time I move, I hope I get a real easy number, something that's easy to remember, something like 222222222. And my friends would be like, Mitch, how do I get a hold of you? And I'd be like, just press 2 for a while. When I pick up, you will know that you have pressed 2 enough.
Oh my gosh. So funny.
He was fantastic. Rip Mitch Hedberg, my still favorite comedian, even though he hasn't produced anything new in almost 20 years. He was fantastic. But yeah, that PubMed ID number that started with 222 made me think of something real easy to remember. 2222222. I just love him so much.
Aw. R.I.P.
Yep, R.I.P. I will text you some Mitch Hedberg goodies later,
yes,
Amy.
Please.
And you can enjoy that. Make Armand watch it with you. But guys, as always, thank you for tuning in for the IBS Freedom Podcast. Rabbit trails abound, telling you about Mitch Hedberg and all of these goodies, but I hope you appreciate all of the little rabbit trails we pepper in. As always, we will see you in the next episode. You know the drill. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and click like and subscribe. Leave us a comment. One of these days, we'll see the comments. I keep telling myself when I have the time, I'm going to read the YouTube comments on our channel.
We did those lives for a very brief
period. For like a week. A week. We'll figure it out. But yeah, pop in the comments. Follow us on Instagram. Amy, your handle on the gram is
Amy_Hollenkamp_RD.
There you go. And I'm Triangle Guts because I'm in the Triangle of North Carolina. So find us on the gram. Like, subscribe, do all the things you normally do that I'm obligated to tell you, and we will see you in the next episode of the podcast. Toodaloo.